Hi folks. So today I'm doing something really quite cool, and I'm back-to-back testing two cars that we own, the M140i and the M4. So I'm going to drive the 140 first with the JB4 switched off, and I'll tell you what I think. So I'm in the M140 first. As we mentioned, it's got the JB4 switched off, so it's just the catalyst downpipe, the BCS mid-pipe, the H&R springs and the spacers over what would otherwise be a standard car. So I'll try and talk about three main things. First of all, the drivetrain, engine, gearbox, the way it puts it down, that sort of thing. Second thing, the chassis, so the suspension and brakes, the grip, the handling, etc. And third of all, comfort, usability. So just cruising along. What are we in? I think we're in comfort mode. Perfectly nice. No intrusive noise. You hear the exhaust a little bit if it kicks down and you accelerating a bit, but yeah, it's perfectly comfortable. It is a little bit damp, but as you can see there's enough power in even standard mode to make it so that you have to modulate the throttle coming out of a corner. For a standard hot hatch, it really is quite potent. So we've got a nice little section of corners up ahead. I'm just waiting here a little while just to make a little bit of space. That's a really good section, just to show you that you're almost always waiting for the front end to bite. It just doesn't have enough front end grip. You sort of have to tease it into a corner, offer it up and sort of try and just prompt it into going where you want it and be quite delicate with it. And you're just waiting for the front end to bite. The rear's got plenty of power, but as long as you're sensible, I think it's probably more rear grip relative to front. It's a fairly good section as well to show this suspension isn't brilliant. It's the passive M Sport suspension with H&R lowering springs. It's just not that composed. It's quite, the whole car is fairly grippy, albeit with a little bit more at the rear than the front. But it's just not that composed, not that talented. It doesn't really deal with bumps and undulations that well, and takes a little while just to compose itself after the bigger bumps. Now, I've mentioned the power already, but even through that short section, it just eats up the ground. Ooh, hurricane coming the other way. Brakes aren't particularly confidence inspiring either. Actually felt okay through that section there, but I know from experience that if you're going a little bit faster and you need them to be a bit stronger and have a bit more faith in them, you always sort of want to cover the brake pedal a little bit more. You don't really want, you're never that confident in them compared to other cars. So the brakes aren't brilliant for a car of this sort of pace. Comfort-wise, you can probably tell it's a lovely place to be. It's very comfortable, it's fairly quiet. You pop it into Eco Pro and you just waft along in comfort. It's a fairly nice cabin. It's not particularly luxurious, it's sort of functional rather than opulent. But it does everything it needs to, and I really, really like it, I do. It's got all the technology you could need, and it also doesn't feel to lack quality. Sometimes with smaller cars in the range, you sort of get a slightly lower quality, and whilst that's the case to some degree, something like a 5 would obviously be higher quality, this still feels perfectly well put together, and it's a lovely place to be. The gearbox, when you're just mooching around, is just seamless. It just effortlessly switches between cogs. It shuffles up quite quickly to be in a high gear, but it's absolutely fine. As a cruising gearbox, it is absolutely brilliant. In fact, I've certainly not driven any gearbox better for daily driving, for getting where you want to get, as opposed to sports driving. When you're pushing on a little bit harder, it feels as though the downshifts just unsettle the car just a touch. Maybe they don't, but I just feel like when you're higher up in the revs and higher up in the power, just unsettles the car a tiny bit. Perhaps something to explore more on track, but it just feels like it not quite planted when you're down changing. So in summary, I'm amazed that you can get a car with this engine and this gearbox in such a enjoyable, comfortable, usable package for south of 30 grand. It's an absolute performance bargain. A used one, you could probably pick up an early 140 now for probably just under 20 grand. That's amazing value. This powertrain is far better than you should be able to buy in a hot hatch for that sort of money. It really is brilliant, and I think it's the last of a dying breed, unfortunately. So I'm so pleased to have got one while we could. The chassis can't quite match the engine, but then it's a little M. It's not a proper M car, so they've got to leave something on the table. It's a cracking car, really excellent road car with a brilliant engine. So let's see what the M4 does above this. I'm in the M4 now, and what a cabin. Just what a cabin. It's a beautiful place to be, really is. First thing that jumps out is the sort of feeling that it's ready to go. It has an urgency about it. I almost always drive it in the Sport Plus engine setting because it just gives you brilliant, really good responsiveness. It just feels like it's just always ready to just lurch forward and go. The steering's different to the 140. It's heavier certainly, but it feels like it's properly weighted. It's not full of feel like a hydraulic system, but it just feels properly weighted compared to the 140. Yeah, straight away it just feels like I feel more attached to the car. So instantly, every time I get in this car, from the get-go, I feel within 500 yards that I'm in a proper driver's car before I've even put my foot down. And this car just feels so much more direct, so much more of a driver's car. Just goads you on from the moment you get into it. That front end, that's the difference. That front end when you're braking and changing down is just with you. The engine feels much more linear. In the twin turbo, it's just much more linear. You don't sort of get quite the wave, so perhaps it disguises just how quick this car is, but it is much more linear in its delivery. So this is undoubtedly a faster car, but it feels like the chassis matches the engine. It really does. It is so planted. It feels so good. I just love driving this car. I love it. It goads you in the same way that the Clio does, but it's got 2.5 times the power. It revs out a bit more as well. There's power right at the top, getting towards 7.5. You've got to be a little bit more finessed with your inputs in this car. The brakes have got more immediate bite. The throttle responds more easily. But the balance is so much better. The front end, it's got what the 140 needs. So in drive, the gearbox isn't quite as smooth and comfortable as the 140's 8-speed, but most of the time when I drive it, I just stick it straight in manual and then just drive it like a manual but with the paddles. Gear changes are instantaneous. They make the ZF gear changes feel dull, and the upshifts, the downshifts, in both cases, it almost makes the ZF feel like you're waiting for it to shift. you're not, it just takes longer to shift. This car's notably firmer. I wouldn't say it's crashy, but it's just firmer. So it's not as comfortable. The seats are harder as well. It's just a step towards being a little bit more focused. So on a long journey, you drive the 140 and you are more refreshed when you get out the other end. I didn't expect that, in all honesty. Perhaps a little naive of me. The 140 is just a more comfortable car. But nonetheless, I'd happily jump in this car and do a 4-hour journey without hesitation. So, I mean, we're talking difference between... What a brilliant car. So it's quite a bumpy road, this, but it deals with it really, really well. You feel the bumps, but it just deals with it. Whereas the 140 never quite feels composed. Anecdotally, I suspect that the earlier M4s and the non-competition pack models don't quite have the same measure of composure. The brakes feel a lot stronger as well. They feel a little bit more immediate. Such great body control, just keeps itself planted. Those bumps there really unsettle the 140. This just stays planted. That's not to say that you take liberties with this. You certainly cannot. You have to always be mindful that it's powerful rear-wheel drive, and you've got to just blend the throttle in. You can't smash it. If you mash the throttle, the car will just cut power. Traction control will just kick in and cut power, and it'll be horrible to drive. But if you drive it with consideration that it's got a lot of power, and just squeeze the throttle in, then it's absolutely lovely. It really is. So how fast is it? Very, very fast. It's a good chunk faster than the 140. And that's saying something, I think. So the engine feels more exotic. It really does. It makes more exotic sounds. The linearity of the delivery, just feels like a more exotic engine. So it's quite something, it really is. So in summary, the M4 is most definitely a driver's car. It is easily the best car I've ever driven. Every time I get into it, I want to thrash the pants off it. I don't, but every time I get in, I want to. It makes you want to drive it hard, and it comes alive when you drive it hard. It feels as though it'll be absolutely brilliant on track. On the road, it feels like a track car. It feels direct, it feels accurate. It really does sit in quite stark contrast to the 140, to be honest. There is so much to love and appreciate about the 140, but brilliantly, there is so much more to appreciate about the M4, as there should be. But if you look at the specs and you look at the bare numbers, you don't get an appreciation for just what an astonishing car this is, even having owned a 140. So now we're going to jump back in the 140 and we're going to do something really, really foolish. We're going to switch the JB4 on and we're going to give the little 140 almost as much power as this, and see whether that makes it better, see how it compares to this. It's really quite silly, but I'll show you how we get on.